Welcome. Thank you. It's a real honor to be here with you to celebrate the life of such a loving husband, a loving father, a loving brother, a loving and fun-loving friend, an accomplished and courageous journalist, a wonderful man, and a person who, as I could tell on your faces looking at these pictures, brought incredible care from people, incredible love, and a lot of laughter as well. We have a lot of stories to tell this evening, and Oren was a professional at stories. And he wasn't even a professional at telling them. He also lived his life in such a way that his life was full of stories. This evening, we'll be honoring and celebrating him by telling and hearing just some of them. And our hope is that by lifting up these stories together, we'll also be lifting up the things and the people and the places that Oren loved and cared about. And we'll bring them with us out of this room in order to honor Oren as long as we live and are able to carry them. The first person I'd like to invite up this evening is Oren's older sister, Oren Dorell. Hi.
Okay, well, Oren was my oldest friend, and we were very dear friends. We made pacts together as children, him 4, me 8, vowing to always have each other's back. We actually sealed one of these oaths with blood. Is that what we thought the Native Americans would do? We moved so much from many countries and states, and we were often isolated in these new environments and spent a lot of time together in imaginary worlds, fighting imaginary foes, rescuing those in need. But I was still his big sister, and nearly 50% of my time I was angry at Oren. There was one thing to be a grown-up and take all these risks, but imagine Oren as a child, as a teenager. He drove us crazy. He drove my parents crazy. He was sometimes out of control. I'm not even going to mention the name our Uncle Avi gave to him, very culturally inappropriate. But my family adopted this term for him because he drove us wild. So I did grow up constantly worried about him and angry, pissed all the time. But there was a memory that popped into my mind when I first heard the news. And I thought it was interesting, and I have a lot of stories. I have a lot of funny stories because I wrote them out this week, and I was laughing a lot. But it's too long for here, and I want to keep it short. But I'm going to tell you one thing that signified something very important to me, obviously. The last time our mother was in the hospital in 1989, we all came together again in Boston, leaning once again on amazing help of friends and family to be there for our mother. All 4 of us crashing at Linda's apartment for the first night. It was late, everybody was sleeping. Oren and I were in the kitchen, and the tension between us was high. There were a lot of unresolved issues. and we had not really gone over the many years past that had been full of family tension and strife. We were afraid for our mother and what lay ahead. In any other case, any other person, this tension would have been swept under the table, pushed into another burden on our backs to get piled high until any glimpse of resolve is buried so deep that it turns into bitterness for life. But not us, and not us in this time of crisis. We needed each other, but starting this discussion was going to be very hard. Kudos to him for pulling up a chair and starting what was going to be a very hard conversation. We called each other out on events from the past, listened to each other's perspective on what happened. We talked and we cried openly until the morning, and the tension evaporated. The next day, we were full of adrenaline of what was facing us at the hospital, but so empowered by our reconnection. We were a team again of respect and understanding, trust and familiarity, brother and sister love. This is what came out of that troublesome kid who drove us nuts. This was the man he had turned into. Where do you find such integrity and devotion? He ended up moving to Boston, postponing school yet again, and getting a construction job to be near our mother while she recuperated for months. He handled all the family matters and would patiently take the time to explain when things weren't clear. You could rely on Oren to listen to you and to give you an honest response. Not always the one you wanted to hear, but honest. Zero bullshit. 100% real. I've not known many people that compassionate and emotionally brave. My brother, my dearest friend, I love you. Lehitrot. We are here for Ginny, Malcolm, and Leo, and we will continue. I just wanted to say a metaphor from friends of mine who told me this recently, that our world has been shattered, and it is all in tiny fragments like shattered glass, and we can't see the future while in the throes of so much pain. But unlike glass, with the gift of time, all these broken pieces will slowly come together, and this world will be whole again. Different, but whole. It'll be a new whole. The Hebrew saying, "Achayim em chazakim ma'kol." Life is stronger than everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carney. Now I'd like to invite up Oren's younger sister, Neva Dorell. Hi. When I was about 9 years old, and Oren 15, our mother used to go to New York City on Wednesday nights for handwriting analysis classes. Every time she left, she'd point to us, and especially to Oren, and say, "No roughhousing." We both nodded, waved goodbye, and as soon as her car disappeared, all hell would break loose. We'd turn off the lights and play air guitar to Deep Purple, cranked up to full volume. We wrestled for hours, which was really Oren pinning me down and tickling me while I screamed and squirmed. One time, Oren asked me to walk on his back, and then yelled out in pain that I'd broken his rib. When I was giving the operator our address so the ambulance would come pick him up,
he walked into the kitchen, smirking, and I started to cry. 2 weeks later, he tickled me so hard that I kicked him and dislocated his kneecap. When he fell to the floor, I stood with my hands on my hips, skeptically looking down at him and said, "You're faking." Oren spoke to me very calmly and patiently, trying to convince me that this time it was for real. Our mother came home that night to a note on the door, "Mrs. Dorell, your children are at Abington Hospital." These were some of the hijinks Oren and I got into when we were young. And while he never really stopped playfully torturing me, Oren also made it clear that he would always be there for me. No matter what. When Oren graduated from high school early, just before turning 17, and hitchhiked across the country to San Francisco so he could get away from our father, who was emotionally abusive at the time, he wrote me weekly letters telling me about his new life and encouraging me to stay strong. Later, when he moved back to Philadelphia, and I was in an all-girl teenage rock band as a teenager, Oren came to every one of our shows, hooting and hollering the loudest, and always stayed to the end to make sure we got home safely. After I graduated high school, Oren let me move into his North Philly loft for a summer. I'll never forget the time some friends brought me home late at night having a bad mushroom trip. Oren took me in without asking any questions or getting mad, put me to bed with some water, and told me to sleep it off. Whenever I got into any kind of trouble, and I got into quite a bit of trouble when I was young, Oren was the first person I called. Knowing he would be willing to help or give sage advice or just listen if I needed it. I didn't realize until later that Oren was the exception rather than the rule. Most people I knew did not have this kind of relationship with their older siblings. It's still amazing to me that in all these years, Oren and I never got mad at each other. There were moments, yes, but they never lasted. The closest to being really angry with Oren that I ever got might have been our trip to Jordan in August 1994. It was a month after Jordan and Israel signed a declaration of peace, but not the actual peace treaty, and not yet legal for Israeli citizens to enter Jordan. But Oren was convinced we could sneak in somehow, and with a bit of finagling and a little luck, we did. When we arrived in the ancient city of Petra, Oren became obsessed with the idea of visiting Aaron's tomb, the place where it is believed Moses' brother Aaron died and was buried. In Arabic, it's called Jabal Harun. There were many reasons why going to Jabal Harun that day was a bad idea. It was very far. You could only get there by foot, by camel or donkey. And we didn't have the right shoes for hiking all that way. It was too late in the day, too hot. We didn't have a guide or enough water. But Oren was adamant. After arguing about it, he finally said in that resolute tone of voice, "Look, you can either stay here or come with me, but I'm going." Of course, I followed him. I figured we'd be safer together than apart. And to make a long story short, it ended up being one of the most physically grueling journeys I've ever experienced to this day. I didn't talk to Oren for 3 days after that. But this journey to Jabal Harun became one of our favorite stories to tell people. After dinner, both of us laughing about how crazy it was. Oren loved to hear me admit that I was glad I went with him, and it really was worth it in the end. When else would I have gotten to see Jabal Harun or be the first Israelis to sign the guest book? That was Oren. Persistent, stubborn as hell, adventurous, courageous, a little mashuga, full of life and passion and always there for his loved ones. His spirit lives on in his boys Malcolm and Leo, his wife Ginny, his family and friends, and each one of us here. I believe Oren would want us all to carry on and to look out for one another now and keep pushing ourselves to live life to the fullest. Oren, thank you for being the best brother and the best male role model. Thank you for all the good times, adventures, advice, and laughs, and good food. We used to say that we'd be friends even if we weren't siblings, but I'm forever proud and grateful to be your sister. I love you.
I'd like to invite up Oren's cousin, Sharon Rabinovitz.
We all know we don't choose our family, and often we have siblings and parents we just don't get along with. Oren, my cousin, and I got along right off the bat, right away. We just clicked, and we had wonderful chemistry. Though cousins, I didn't meet him until I think I was 17 or 16. I was born in Israel, Oren was born in Canada, Bolivia. I don't remember where you traveled. We moved to Philadelphia in 1980. And somehow, Varda, you guys ended up in Philadelphia as well, in the suburbs. So somehow we all met. Actually, I think it was 85, 84. So I was 17, I think he was 20. And I don't remember this was the first time that we met, but I remember the first long conversation we had. We ran into each other on the bus on the way to Fern Rock Station, subway station. And we had a long conversation because I think the bus was late. We were just sitting there waiting. And so there we were. My father was killed when I was 7. Oren's father, there were issues. So we were there, 2 young men with huge chips on our shoulder, very angry at the world, very much rebellious, not liking authority. And it was an instant bond. It was more like the chip on my shoulder met the chip on his shoulder. And it was like, all right. And it grew from there. We always pushed each other, both argumentative. He was much more stubborn than I was, but we both had a respect for the truth. When it came down to it, we had a respect for the facts and for the truth, and that always saved the day. We both went to Temple University. He was involved in filmmaking and as a writer. I ended up getting a master's degree in film. He was a contractor. I ended up doing flipping some houses, doing construction. We seem to always have parallels in our lives. We both ended up with beautiful, all-American, wholesome girls that we proceeded to torture with being stubborn, dark humor, being obstinate, thinking we were always right about everything. We just had a lot of parallels in our lives. And it's very strange to think that I'm going to not have that brother in arms the rest of the way. There's one story that comes to mind last summer. There's tons of stories, but the one that came to mind was one from last summer. The phone rang. It's a Saturday, and the phone rings, and I see Oren at the caller ID, and the routine was I wouldn't say hello or hey, I would just say no, and he would start laughing, and I would say, let me guess, you're at a rest stop somewhere off of 95, you're heading up to Philly or Harleysville, you're coming up to visit, and you want to know if you can come for dinner or crash for the night, right, without warning, and he would laugh. And so then it was just about coordinating the time. And he would say, 5, and I would say, okay, so that means 6:30. Because that's OST, which is Oren Standard Time. And he laughed. So he arrives, and he arrives with his motorcycle, and he's got this contraption. He wants to install this holder for the iPhone so he can navigate while he's riding. He says, do you have any tools? Of course I have tools. I have all of Home Depot in the basement. So we start going at it on the sidewalk. I call my son. He's in Sweden, so we have a video chat because I know he loves Oren, and they just got along really great. So that was kind of a fun moment. And then he goes off, and we agreed on, I think, Sandra, you were going to make rack of lamb. We went shopping, or you went shopping. He went to visit a friend, I think Sheila. And the whole time, there's this guy standing in the sidewalk right there, like pretty much in front of the house, and he's kind of looking around. And I'd seen him before. Before Oren even arrived, I wasn't even sure what he was doing there. Then Oren was there. He was still there. And at some point, it turns out that Oren is talking to him. And Oren turns to me, he's like, this guy needs to jump his car. His car is right there. Why don't you jump him? And, that's my personality and his personality. But my personality, I'm thinking, dude, it's a Saturday. We're a block away from the Italian market, if you know what that means. If you take the car out, if I pull my car out, I'm not going to find parking for 4 hours. And he's like, come on, help him. So I get the car, and we jump the guy, except it doesn't work. It's not a battery that's faulty. Whatever was wrong with his car, we couldn't fix it. And, of course, I laid into Oren. I'm like, great, I lost my spot for nothing. And he laughed it off. He comes back later. We have dinner. I guess the next morning he went on his way. And maybe it was that day or the next day, Sandra, you'll remind me. I get back, and there's a box of donuts, a Dunkin' Donuts, big box. And I look at Sandra like, what is this? We don't do donuts. And she said it was that guy that Oren was helping out. He came back, and he just wanted to, he didn't know that Oren didn't live in our house. He wanted to thank Oren. And that's Oren. That's the biggest lesson. I mean, there's so many lessons, but that's where I looked up to him. That to me is his biggest gift. And I took a photo. I have the photos. I texted Oren, and he was like, yeah. And of course, I said something like, yeah, but they're not even, it's all the same donut. It's not even a variety pack. And I meant that. But that's Oren. He was, one of the closest things I would have to a brother. I'm also a middle child, flanked by my sisters. A lot of parallels all around. We had mothers who were fragile and sensitive and would never give us permission to go back to Israel and join the Israeli army. So big chip on our shoulder. And the chip on my shoulder is going to miss the chip on his shoulder. And so you want to say rest in peace, but that's the worst thing you can say to Oren. Oren was not somebody who wanted to rest. He was restless. But not in that ADD way that's so 21st century. He was truly wanderlust, right? So do not rest, Oren. And peace, he liked nothing better than a good argument or a fight. So peace, the only peace he probably would have agreed to is the one you find in the eye of the hurricane. So that's my wish to you.
Now I'd like to invite up Curtis Elmendorf, who will be reading a letter from a childhood friend of Oren's from Israel, Ariel Waterman.
We saw those photos, and in every one of those photos, I saw Leo and Malcolm. Everyone. A letter from Israel. It is unbearable to think that Oren is gone, thousands of miles away, It would have been tempting to let his thought go away, but this would have been unfair to Oren. Oren was a world-renowned international journalist who was a source of pride to all of us. In every visit to the U.S., I researched the papers looking for Oren's unique articles. That was Oren to me. I would like to tell you now about Oren, my childhood friend. My friendship with Oren was formed in his Haifa years, when he was 5 years old until he was 12 years old. This was indeed a formative period in both my life and his, years of novelty, curiosity, and naivety. Oren was an unusual child, an impossible combination of strength, power, and stubbornness on one hand, and on the other hand, sensitivity, vulnerability, and naivete. Anyone who knew his parents immediately realized that this was the exact combination of their characters. These opposite characteristics made him the special and impressive child that he was. Already as a small child, he had a global view of life and was well aware of everything that happened around him. He was totally indifferent to the separation between child and adult worlds. Neither did he have any respect for hierarchy of any kind. Quick to respond to everything, he had to meet the principal or kindergarten caretaker at times when they had a hard time to comply with his demands. How brave and naive was Oren when we went on a trip to Sinai and decided it was about time to try pot for the first time. We were three friends, aged 15. Oren, the adult figure, went on the mission to buy the weed. It was not before long when Oren returned claiming proudly that he had already paid the Bedouin guy, and he got a promise that the seller would return shortly with the weed. We are still waiting. After his family returned to the States, we kept writing each other over many years. In many letters, Oren described vividly his experiences, difficulties, and how he missed his Israeli friends, and on the same time, his new adventures and experiences of life. To many of these letters, he attached pictures of nature and snow. I have no doubt that these letters were his first steps as an international journalist. How happy was I when his family visited for the first time in Israel a few years ago. A wonderful family indeed. Jenny, Leo, Malcolm. I was so happy. Could this really have been? Oren became bourgeois, settling down as any other man. Yes, his soft spot won. Oren started a family with Jenny without losing even one drop of his unique character. This is a wonderful achievement that will remain forever after him. On his last visit to Israel, just 3 months ago, we went down for a short hike to our childhood playground, the Wadi, where all our childhood memories overwhelmed us, directly arising from the time that we were at Leo and Malcolm's age. Oren remembered how only once he was able to convince his father to join him on one of those trips to the Wadi. He reflected on this totally different relationship he had with his own children. How good are they, and how close and loving are his family to him. Then we went to the 2-story cave, our childhood second home. Afterwards, we went to Haifa downtown, where he visited his father's store. As an experienced journalist, he immediately started to interview the unsuspecting current store owner. Despite having visited Israel many times, it was his decision to visit his childhood places only on that last visit. Then he described that experience to Jenny and the kids. You could sense this urge to pass all his emotions and feelings to them. Alas, today this visit has a different meaning to me. Everything combines and is getting mixed, the past and the present. The childhood in Haifa, Israel, the long-gone parents, Oren's family in the U.S., and the terrible loss. Oren was a man of principle, honest, loyal, a true friend. I believe that this was no coincidence that Oren was able to remain in touch with us for so many years. Oren's sudden death was the most unexpected blow to us, and in great contradiction to the continuity that we intended to preserve for many years onward. We're terribly sad. It seems so unfair that Oren should lose his best years intended to be spent with his family, Jenny and kids. I do believe that you, Jenny and children, Carney and Neva, will be able to rise from the depth of sorrow and grief and live a good life with Oren's memory. I remember Oren's comforting words to me when my father died, when I was 10 years old. Oren's mature words to me describing my future. I quote his words when I say to Jenny and Leo and Malcolm, you will continue to live your lives experiencing the good, the bad, and enjoy it. Oren will continue to remain in our minds, at first with an unbearable pain, and then as time goes by in a warm, soft feeling of love. Oren said this to me when we were 10 years old, and I have to say this again. Hugging, crying, and comforting. Ariel.
ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, אדוני ישמור צאתך ובואך. מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד Oren, this is for you. Love from Haifa.
Another family friend of Oren's, one from Philadelphia, Hollis Sherman Pepe. I'd like to invite her up to speak.
Ooh. I've known Oren as long as I can remember. And he never tired of reminding me and telling my friends, I've known Hollis since she was in diapers. Can you believe that? And then he'd smile broadly, and then he would laugh, and I'd mirror him, mostly because he was so amused at how incredible that fact was to him. Oren was my first adult friend. It was a relationship that spanned decades, and it evolved as I became an adult too. In the early 80s, Oren was a carpenter. He worked with my father, Jim Pepe. Oren sported a black beard, and he was always just really cool. My mom referred to this young group of carpenters, and that includes Kevin as well, as the guys. My mom, Joyce Sherman, and my dad each call Oren Dorell a best friend. He is family to us. This incredible man has lived 1,000 lifetimes in his 53 years on this planet. When he became a journalist, his adventures across the globe and the stories that he told in USA Today swelled his life experience. This was Oren, the witty, inquisitive, cool guy with a nose ring that helped me with my homework. He was a hell of a conversationalist, challenging you to think, state your opinions, and ask questions. A truth seeker, an adventure seeker, a man that would give the shirt off his back, and he made a veggie stir fry so spicy that your eyeballs would just pop out of your steaming ear holes. Dang. Oren, I respect you till no end. I remember meeting Jenny, who was this beautiful woman with the Rapunzel hair that was dating my Uncle Oren. Jenny stole all of our hearts immediately. And now, as an adult, I can say with confidence that there's nothing more heartwarming than when your dear friend finds their perfect match. Hey, Oren, do you remember that time that we went on the glider ride? Of course you do, it was your idea. And it was epic. And he totally almost barfed when we did the loop-de-loop. And it was so cool seeing the entire Earth upside down. Earth kind of feels upside down right now without you standing on it. But your impact has left marks on those who you've touched, deep marks in our hearts and in our minds. When people say of the dead that their memory lives on, shoot, you really will. Your inspiration will last ages. And look at your boys, Malcolm and Leo. Such bright and amazing young men. Even though I live all the way across the country now, I have loved spending time with you guys as you grow up, or growing up. And I cannot wait till I get to tell your adult friends, you know, I've known him since he was in diapers. Can you even believe that? A summer evening in 2012, I had tickets for a movie screening on the lawn of Hollywood Forever Cemetery. They were projecting one of my favorites, Chinatown, on the mausoleum wall. I asked Oren, he's like, we gotta go, we gotta bring the boys. And Oren thought that the movie was gonna be too boring and too mature, because they were 7 and 5 at the time. But I insisted that they would enjoy the picnic and the fanfare of it all. Plus, if the movie isn't to taste, they could simply fall asleep. We had a blast. They each sat in our laps so they could see over the crowd of heads. And I would whisper into Malcolm's ear if I thought the movie was getting too complicated. But to my chagrin, at one point, he whispered in my ear and said, "That's not the real Mrs. Mulray. She's an imposter." Malcolm, Leo, I want you both to know that that night, that's one of my happy places. And I'm going to cherish that deeply. There's too many stories to share. Introducing me to Neva, who's also inspired me tremendously. Taking in my Stacy Beau when she needed a place to live. And she too became family to the Dorells. Being a call to action when Sheila had her accident. Reporting on war, peace, a bearer of friendship and family, a craftsman, a journalist, a top-notch human being. Thank you, Oren. You're a tremendous gift.
Now I'd like to invite up the woman who sang at Oren and Ginny's wedding, Oren's friend from Akron, Jen Maurer.
Is this one working? Okay. I owe my friendship to Oren, who I've known and met in 1998, so 20 years this year, to the Akron Beacon Journal, to my mother, who was one of his first interviews in Akron, and to his yes mentality, because he came and did an interview and she said, "Got anything going tonight?" And he said, "No." And she said, "Do you like music?" And he said, "Yeah." She said, "Do you like to dance?" He said, "Yeah." She said, "Do you want to come see my daughter play?" And he said, "Yeah." So that's how I met Oren. And I won't talk a lot because I have a song that to sing for him that I tried to craft. But kind of boils down to a bunch of fun activities: food, chopping garlic in the kitchen, trying my first halva, eating Ethiopian here in D.C., having someone pick up carry-out for the entire band at our Glen Echo gig when we were done. I love swimming, dancing, and other activities. I know that one time after our gig, we took the boys, I don't know if you remember this, to some random, I think it was random river where it was dark and totally nighttime, and we all just went and jumped in the river. We also would, had a swimming band activity thing where he brought the boys swimming one time. And then, of course, there's the Ocracoke beach wedding where we went swimming, and then maybe some people went naked running on the beach, and then the next day we all evacuated for a hurricane and our car wouldn't start. So that's Oren. There's we took swing dances when in a group of 8 when he lived in Akron, and just if you wanted to just have a good wrestling match or maybe do some back porch yoga, he was a guy to call. And then the thing that kind of made him special is he had all this fun stuff, but he had a serious side of knowledge that I really, really respected. If I wanted to know what was happening in the Middle East or Syria or what was going on with ISIS or Daesh or I don't know the name of it now because I can't ask him, but or just if you wanted comfort after, maybe needed comfort after a certain political presidential election, he was the one to call. So I'm really grateful for all those memories, and here's a little song for him. Woman on the phone, bearing bad news. I'm driving alone and she's trying to get through. I just don't get it. I can't comprehend why she say your name like that, my friend. Jenny, she wants all of us to know there was an accident on your way home. And I just don't get it. I can't comprehend why she say your name like that, my friend. Don't she know that you're the benevolent giant walking through our fields, sowing the magic fairy tales, brandishing laughter for warriors' shield, never to fall, never to fail. Handsome as all get out, charm for a mile, hands of a real man and an all-knowing smile. I just don't get it, I don't understand. Where'd you go, my friend? Come, my benevolent giant, blaze through the field, tell the magic of fairy tales, brandish your wisdom for warrior shield, rescue my wind with your sails. And they say you're gone, but I know that they're wrong. They're not in the know. That's not how fairy tales Tradition can't die, it owns the fields, carries the magic of fairy tales. A legend it burns, the mist at our feet, feels never to fail, never to fail. Must have been a foul hit to take you down, 'cause you're so strong and I easily cowed. I just don't get it, I can't understand. Where'd you go, my friend? What a cursed spell, the day our giant fell. Oren is a larger-than-life person, and that will never end. He is a rather mystical and magical creature in my memory forever. And this is from Sam to Malcolm and Leo. Sam says, having known your father, I am certain he would want you to follow your dreams, dance to your own drumbeat, and become your own person, people. But if you should turn out like Oren, I'm sure no one will mind.
Beautiful. I'd like to invite up Andrea Weigel, a friend of Oren's from Raleigh.
That was a really beautiful song. Thank you. Oren and I started at the Raleigh News and Observer a few days apart in July 2000. He was the police reporter and I was the courts reporter, and as a result, we fell in together. It wasn't long before I was invited to his and Ginny's apartment for dinner, and inside I would find the people who would turn out to be among the most important friendships in my life. Not only was there Oren and Ginny, but there was Bill, Amir, and Steve, all neighbors that Oren had pulled into his orbit and around his dinner table. For me, Oren opened my eyes to the fun of a dinner party, and we would trade invitations back and forth all through his time in Raleigh. Him often schooling me and others in the kitchen, me collecting cookbooks because I saw Oren using them. The only way I can describe the importance of those friendships is that these were the friends I wanted to spend my holidays with. It was my Friendsgiving before that was a thing. If not for Oren and those dinner parties, where the ratio was always 1 bottle of wine per person, and the conversations were deep and varied and would go on for hours. If not for those dinner parties, Bill would never have learned how to cook, and now he surpasses us in the kitchen. Amir would never have been to Ocracoke, one of his favorite places, and never watched several of his friends married there, first Oren and Ginny, and then me and my husband. Steve would not have gone to night school and then college at Oren's urging, and now he gets to tell 2-star generals what to do. I would not have become a food writer, published a cookbook, or found my journalism career take such a delicious turn. My first forays into food writing started because of those dinners with Oren and those friends. For each of us, Oren was an inspiration, a kick in the ass, a prodder to be our best selves. To paraphrase what my friend Steve said the other day, I want to drink from the fountain of life like he did. For all that we loved Oren, he also could aggravate us to no end. To love Oren was to love his dog. To love Oren was to know that dinner would not be served until 9 p.m. To love Oren and disagree with him was to hear his low baritone voice say, okay, 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 or listen, listen, listen. To love Oren, and this happened to Steve, you can ask him about it later, was to have him show up at your house with 2 live chickens and announce that he and you were going to build a chicken coop. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the journalism Oren did in Raleigh, and one series of stories stands out from the rest. His desk as the police reporter faced a bank of televisions that were always on in the newsroom, as they are in every newsroom. And one day our editor, Melanie Sill, walked over and asked kind of an innocuous question, like, what's going on? And Oren pointed to the television screens, which were showing the escalating conflict in Israel and the West Bank in the spring of 2002. And he expressed his frustration. And on the spot, Melanie challenged him to propose a reporting trip and find stories that connected what was going on there with people in North Carolina. And he rose to the challenge. And he wrote this series of stories that I can only describe as being or showing the people on the banks of the river. That trip was a turning point for Oren. It's one thing to believe you can do that kind of reporting, and I suspect Oren always had that faith in his ability. It's completely another thing to be able to convince your boss that you can. And after that series ran, Oren was not much longer for the News and Observer. He could see his way clear to the reporting life that he wanted, and he set out to get it, like he had always encouraged us to do with our lives and our careers. I'd like to end this with this memory that my colleague Craig Jarvis sent me about Oren when I asked people to send me their memories. And these are Craig's words. For some reason, the main memory I have about Oren was at his departure gathering in the newsroom, when he said he once asked a colleague how he dealt with all the human tragedy of the crime beat. And the reporter replied that you just get used to it. And Oren said he never got used to it. Craig continued, as the reporter who so blithely said, oh, you get used to it, I was struck by how important it was to Oren to carve out that bit of humanity. Of course, you don't really get used to it. You adapt or you don't. And I'm glad that Oren was able to find a more rewarding path. And I think he probably did quite a bit of good for the world. Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite a family friend from the Maury community, Vanessa Duckett, to come say a few words.
In every experience lies something that is meant to give us insight, or a bit of hope, or warmth when we are ready. In every experience lies a note to self, one that can be piercingly plain, or so hard to see before our pain has had time to shed its thorns. Through my search for a why or a how, I found a bit of peace in this truth about Oren. Through Oren's living, he gave us all a gift. He chose to live a life full of significance and purpose, a life that screamed, I was here. He chose to live fearlessly, inspirationally, and unapologetically. Together, he and Jenny built an amazing family, and I frankly have been blessed to be a part of it. Oren contributed to each and every community that he belonged to and advocated for those most vulnerable and in need. He and I worked together back in like 2008 or 9 on a harebrained scheme he had to change the way math was done at Maury Elementary School. And I didn't think we could do it, but he did. Oren knew that children deserved to learn differently than they were learning at that time. Their learning needed to be deeper and wider, and so the adventure began. Last weekend, I reread our emails that were over 9 years old, and I realized that in 10 strategic moves, he changed the way we did math and many other schools in DC. His email started out like this: "So what do you think about?" Or, "We ought to try this." And midway, his emails went more like, "I didn't see the go-ahead yet. What do you think they're thinking?" And his very last email on this topic said, "Oh, do you think we should tell DCPS about this?" Oren was so many things to so many people. And to me, he was a friend, a thought partner, an advocate, and at his core, a father who remarkably didn't fit into any mold. Nope, he bent edges and he bowed straight lines. I can truly say this man used his powers for good, and it was an honor to know him. Let us all continue his legacy by being a little bit more bold about change and advocacy, and a little more adventurous in our pursuit of happiness, learning, and growth. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite up a friend and colleague from USA Today, Jessica Durando.
If I had to describe Oren, I would say that he was always in motion. He'd wake up before 6 a.m., he'd check the news, and start tweeting the thoughts on what was happening in the wider world around us. I'd get an email immediately once he found a story angle, or about 5 for the day. "What do you think of this? Wouldn't that be a good way to approach it?" he'd say. I'd wipe the crud from my eyes as they were tired and start skimming his feed as I brushed my teeth, just nodding to his insights and opinions as I got the back molars before I even went into the office. That's how we started our days as reporter and editor. And I knew it was special then. He was in constant communication with the newsroom, with the State Department, with the people he covered, and the analysts he built strong relationships with. "I have this tip," he'd say, smiling ear to ear. "I actually have 2. "All right, Oren, which one is better?" "Jess, they're both really good." "Okay. Give me the better one first," I'd say. Oren was a wonderful colleague and a damn good journalist. His enthusiasm and his curiosity were only matched to the high standards he had for himself and of USA Today, the news organization that he was very proud to represent. In the hours before Oren passed away, I got the chance to kick back and talk to him about things that didn't involve Russian election meddling, or North Korea's Kim Jong-un, or Donald Trump. We went to Isabella Eatery in Tyson's to have some $1 happy hour oysters after he got out of this great meeting with our new Washington editor. He was in a celebratory mood, even though he wouldn't tell me what they talked about. He said, "Let's go grab a snack." And I said, "Didn't you tell me you were going home for dinner with Ginny?" Oren was always hungry. It made me laugh often because I started to follow suit, and I'd be sure to take 2 yogurts to the office or an extra piece of fruit to make sure he had something in his stomach before he got down to business. So, as Owen would say, he didn't get cranky. But I knew when I was doing that he had had a full breakfast beforehand at some event that he had gone to in DC. So when we got to the eatery, I said, "Oren, this isn't going to be a snack for me. This is going to be my dinner." And he just laughed. We sat at the bar, and he started ordering 2 dozen oysters, grilled cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and chicken wings, looked at me and asked if I wanted another order of chicken wings, to which I said, "No, thank you." And he ended up polishing off most of the food, but I was sure to eat all of my oysters. And I told him in the beginning that I'd beat him in finishing them, but obviously I stood absolutely no chance. He talked about the diving trip he planned to take with the boys, and his eyes just lit up. And I thought, he's one of the good guys. And he imparted some knowledge on this fantastic whole roasted cauliflower recipe that he had made recently for his wife and friends. I said to him point blank, "Oren, when do you sleep? You make me exhausted just thinking about everything that you do." But that was how he lived, always moving forward, always ready for whatever the next day might bring. He was inspiring to see in action, and I felt honored to know someone like him. We left the restaurant just as the sun was setting Friday evening. He put on his motorcycle helmet, and I watched as he zoomed past me. The sky started to change colors, and I'll just never forget how beautiful my friend looked riding off on one of his favorite bikes. Thank you.
I'd like to invite up another one of Oren's friends and colleagues, William Dermody.
I had the pleasure of knowing Oren for several years, and like a lot of people at USA Today, we met him when he arrived in the newsroom. It was probably shortly after I started. Oren's the kind of guy, as you know, makes an impression pretty quickly. He slipped into the night desk where we worked at the time. If some of you don't know, that's a place where you're close to deadline, you're in between editions trying to get the paper out, and deadlines are tight. You need to work fast. Tempers can get frayed. And Oren was very methodical in his work. So I remember the first time I actually had to work with him on a story. It was a fire out on the West Coast, I believe, and his job was to call people anywhere he could find them near the fire and try to get quotes for that story that night that would lead the paper. It's not an easy task to do that. So we have him do up a story, quickly gets it back, and in there are the most amazing quotes from people who talked at length about what they had seen and how heartbroken they were of their losses. And we all looked at each other and said, how could he have done that on a telephone? It's usually something that's even difficult to do when you're in person with someone. And what we realized then, as we saw him do other stories similarly, is that Oren had this way about him. He had that voice, and he had a manner. And when he talked to people, they got the sense that they could trust this man. They wanted to open up to this man and tell him sincerely what they were thinking. It was a gift he had. And after listening here this evening, I can see he had that gift that he bestowed on many people. So when it came time for him to go out on assignments, we learned something else about Oren, and that was his fearlessness and his pursuit of the story to the exclusion of everything else. There was a hurricane in Texas. He was sent down to cover it along with others. Oren wasn't satisfied hanging around waiting for the daily dispatches from the emergency personnel. He had to get out there somewhere and see where the action was. That was pure Oren. So he found somehow a boat, maybe the last boat that was around, got somebody to go along with him, tried to get over, I believe it was Galveston, to see where there was some real wreckage where no one had gotten to yet. He wanted to go where the story was. He didn't quite make it. His boat got swamped. He and some equipment went in the bay. Both he and his photographer managed to get out of there. I got to talk to the photographer first, and he said, "That guy's crazy." But if you're a journalist, no one thought, that was so crazy. Maybe a little headstrong and heedless of the dangers at times, but it showed that he really was someone to be reckoned with as a journalist. He was going to get the story. When I went to the foreign desk, so did he, and there are others here who worked there as well. And that's when he really started his foreign affairs career. And we weren't sure how it would go. No one would. I remember, I think, one of the assignments that really showed us what kind of a journalist he could be in the field was during the Ukraine war. It was a very crazy place to be, among the many that some reporters here have been to. But especially there because no one knew where any of the battle lines were. No one, in fact, knew who was actually there fighting the war. There were people who were incognito. There were terrorists there, as well as rumors of Russian soldiers fighting on the side of certain partisans there, dressed not in uniform. No one was able to confirm it, really. Oren decided he was going to try to do his best to do that. He got a driver. He went into the conflict zone. Somehow someone told him that they heard that an Air Force base had been occupied by men in black uniforms with no insignias. No one knew who they were. That was his cue to go there, because that was the most dangerous place to be. And we lost contact with him for a day or two. That happens with foreign correspondents. And eventually he called on the sat phone and says he's here outside this Air Force base. and people are telling him that they think that those are the Russians inside there, they're soldiers, they're professional. He says there's a problem though, and those are the words you heard often from Oren, and you just braced to hear what it was going to be. And in this case it was, well, they dragged my driver out of the car and they really slapped him around and they said they're going to arrest him and they took him away. And now they're kind of eyeing me suspiciously as well. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I said, Oren, what you're going to do is get a driver, someone, get to a city, get out of that area. It's too dangerous. But Oren, he wouldn't do something like that. First, he said that he can't leave his driver behind. This was someone he only knew for a day or two. It was someone he barely spoke the same language with. I mean, this man knew some English, but not a lot. But he would not leave him behind. I said, Oren, you really, it's too dangerous. You should go. He said, well, let me see how it goes. I'll try to talk to these people, see if they'll be reasonable. And then he said, besides, I saw a tavern over here. I want to try their borscht. As Jessica pointed out, yes, he was always hungry. In fact, most of the time he prepared for that in between by taking, when he was at his assignment down in Texas, there was nothing open, nothing available to eat or drink. I said, how are you surviving down there? And he said, oh, I picked up a couple of cases of Ensure at a Walmart or something before I came in. I'm drinking that every day. Okay. Those were the things he did because he was indefatigable in trying to get the story. And it's because he really cared about the cultures that he was enmeshed in. He was always the professional doing his story, gathering the news, but he cared deeply about the people that he was covering, and that is one of the things that made him a really great reporter. People wanted to talk to him and open up to him, as I said. And I'm not sure why that was. I think, though, could have had something to do with that all-penetrating stare he would give you sometimes that he wouldn't let go of. Something that told people that he would tell their stories right. You need some certain traits to be a great reporter, and Oren had them. He had no preconceived notions when he went into a story, really. He wanted to know all sides. He wanted to learn. He really liked being educated. He enjoyed finding things out that he didn't know. He always wanted to seek the truth. He was big on that. As journalists, the ones I've had the pleasure of working with, they know that you usually don't find it, but you try to seek it out and get to as close to it as possible. And certainly Oren would do that. And we know he was fearless, which you need to be as well, and he was dogged in sticking to a story. This all made him a very special journalist, but also a special man. He was earnest. He had courage. He was very resourceful as well. The last time I saw Oren, we got to get together for some dinner here in town, a couple beers. And of course, he wanted to talk about all the things that he is working on and wanted to know, what I knew. I said, Oren, I work in the soda industry now. I don't know anything of these things anymore. I haven't heard anything about the Russians. So once that was done, he wanted to talk about what he always wanted to talk about, even in the newsroom, and that was his boys. They were the ones that he cared about most and thought about, I'm sure, in all his travels. He would talk about their ups and downs, what he hoped for them, what kind of men he hoped they would grow up to be. So to Leo and Malcolm, I want to let you know that your father was one of the most respected journalists a lot of us knew, and a good man. And I think one way to honor him would certainly be to just try to learn what's right and wrong, which is something he always tried to figure out in his journalism, and then never be afraid to stand up for it.
I'd like to invite up Andrea Yu, another friend and colleague of Oren's, and someone who shared his love of motorcycles.
Okay, I think I just learned so much more about Oren that I didn't know just an hour ago. But I remember Oren was a tough guy who didn't always look it, at least not at work. He was always talking about the gourmet meals that he would just whip up the night before, like it was easy. But there's so much more to Oren. I used to ride my motorcycle to work, 50 miles each way, and Oren would ask me about it. And the next thing I knew, Oren had his own bike. But he couldn't just do something. He had to do everything to the max. So long after I put my bike away for the winter, Oren was still riding in the cold, in the snow, with his laptop and the gourmet meal that he just whipped up the night before. I wondered that maybe Oren liked to make things harder, but I was wrong. Everything was just too simple for Oren. He just needed a challenge. Oren was adventurous and fearless, and he never shied away from any mission, any goal, or any story. He always had an interest in meeting people, listening to their beliefs, and then challenging them. Oren couldn't just be in your life. He had to leave an imprint, and that he did. Oren always chose the unconventional path, doing what others find too difficult or frightening. He cut his own path, always with courage, hope, optimism. And he's probably doing that right now, driving the people upstairs crazy with his trademark smirk and his laugh. Another one of his editors couldn't be here today, Owen Ullman, and he wanted me to read this little tribute he wrote for Oren. Owen wrote that, I discovered how courageous and passionate Oren Dorell was during his job interview to be a reporter at USA Today in 2004. He had submitted story samples from being a police reporter at the News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was taken with one about how it felt like to be shocked by a taser. How did it feel, I asked him. The most painful thing I ever did, he replied. So why subject yourself to such pain? Well, how else can I describe to readers how it felt, he said. That was Oren. Intrepid on assignment, passionate about his work, and determined to serve readers at great personal risk. That's why we hired him, and that's why I love being his editor, colleague, and friend. Oren was so full of life, love, adventure, and everything he did as journalist, husband, father, and friend. Oren adored his wife, Ginny, and their two boys, Malcolm and Leo. As someone who frequently broke bread with him, I witnessed how much he relished eating exotic food. As his longtime editor, I can attest how much he thrived on difficult assignments. For Oren, the world was a series of intriguing mysteries he wanted to unravel and shed light on for his readers. Danger was just a routine job hazard, whether covering the aftermath of a hurricane, the fighting in eastern Ukraine and Iraq, or a political uprising in Egypt. When Oren was covering a conflict between Ukrainian national troops and Russian-backed separatists, one day I received a phone call from him and could hear rocket fire in the background. "Where are you?" I shouted. "Pinned down inside the airport where the two sides are fighting," he explained. "I told you not to go close to live fighting," I yelled. "The rebels said there's no fighting between 1 and 3 p.m., so I went then," he said sheepishly. I guess they didn't observe the truce this time. Oren was able to capture a jewel of a story. An elderly woman and her cat had become trapped in her tiny apartment. After his moving story was published, local residents helped relocate the woman and her cat to a safer apartment. And readers donated money. Oren went to great lengths to ensure that every penny went to aid the woman and her cat. I was never more proud of him as a journalist, and he was never happier to have made a difference for the better in someone's life. And Oren, I actually want to tell you that you have made a difference for the better in everyone's lives that you have met. Thank you.
We've heard from people from all over Oren's life, and we'll have time to hear from some more in a moment. But for now, let's take a minute to read and chant and sing the words that are core to the mourning process in the Jewish tradition, which was so important to Oren. And first, we're going to read a psalm together, Psalm 23. And I'll say that for some people, this will be a healing psalm, a psalm of comfort. For some people, the psalm might feel more hopeful, aspirational, for a future potential comfort. And for some people, this psalm might be something to wrestle with, something hard, something difficult to read. But I'm learning that Oren was a wrestler, and Oren was someone who held multiple truths within himself. And so if you're feeling this psalm as ironic, or if you're feeling this psalm as hopeful, or if you are truly able to be healed by it, let's all rise those multiple voices together. A psalm of David. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures. God leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul. God guides me in straight paths for God's name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. El malei rachamim, shochen b'maromim, amtze menucha nechona, tachat kanfei hashchina. במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמת אורן בן הרד וורדה, הנם בעל הרחמים, יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח על משכבו בשלום, ונאמר Amen. God, full of mercy, who dwells in high places, grant repose under Shekhinah's wings in the heights of the holy and the pure, like a light glowing in the firmament, to the soul of Oren, son of Harold and Varda. Merciful One, conceal him under your wings forever, and bind his soul to life. The compassionate One is his portion. May he rest in peace in his place. And let us say, Amen. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chaye chon uv'yom echon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadal v'yitaleh v'yithalal shemei dekudesha brichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. You may be seated. Now, I'd like to invite folks who would like to share their own stories of Oren to do so, and there are two names I'd like to call first. First, we have a letter written by a friend of Oren's in Israel, Noga Tarnopolsky. And this letter will be read by Gwendolyn Flanders.
Hi, I'm Gwen Flanders. I was Oren's first editor at USA Today in breaking news and then politics, or vice versa. And then he moved on to foreign affairs, but we remained friends. Today, though, I'm reading the words of Oren's friend and colleague in Israel, Noga Tarnopolsky. She writes, I met Oren 16 years ago. A fact he pointed out to me during his recent visit to Israel after I said something inane about not wanting to burden him with one of my family stories. 2002, he glowered. American Colony Hotel cellar bar, give it up. We met amid a group of Israeli and foreign journalists covering whatever part of the Second Intifada was blistering just then, who used to swarm the bar with our laptops and our loud phone calls in the evening. Oren was completely Oren from the start. Bright, frank, cautious, knowledgeable, curious, impatient, clear about what he planned to do, nothing like the other parachutists. And that was that, the start of a decade-and-a-half-long comradeship that came to encompass A few shared bylines and many exchanges, some hours long, and all now left hanging in the air. On matters as diverse as career paths, multi-culti families, and whether one should bother interviewing an unreliable source. Oren's view was, yes. My view was, do you have any idea the crap that guy stands for? Oren, so what? It's a valid point of view. Me, why bother? For Oren it was, invariably, why the hell not? Oren was always working on something, more often than not, on a subject I knew nothing about, in which I discovered he had genuine expertise. Russia murdering journalists, for instance. Korea, Iran, Ukraine, Trump's Washington. He could talk about the Israeli-Palestinian predicament as perceptively as any local. I don't think I ever conversed with Oren without being surprised by something, as if he protected data and points of view in some secret pockets, a quality shared by no one else I knew. In February, when I incredulously asked if he was scolding me for saying what I thought about an international figure, Oren wrote me, yes, hackers and all, you are a USAT stringer and can't be caught calling names. He loved working for USA Today, and he took it very seriously, as one should. For me, far away, he was a uniquely generous colleague, eager to share bylines or give them away. He was always in the middle of something, the conversation never ending, because of his persistence, his unwavering conviction that there was always something more, a new fact, an important facet to explore, or simply a revelation that would result from the ongoing conversation. We were lately in conversations about a future article, a West Bank tale we could hardly believe, for which Oren was pushing me to speak with people I'd normally dismiss. For many reasons, Oren's death feels like a mistake. One of them is that he had little tolerance for absolutes. His mind scoffed at an open and shut case, or at the common premature notion that a story was done and there was nothing still left to do. So, it feels wrong that we are now left to grapple with a reality in which there is, for real, nothing we can do. In the most irrational, open and shut case ever imagined, Oren was here, and now he isn't. And there isn't anyone to talk to, or any rational discussion that can help, or any uncovered fact that will bring this awful picture into focus and make it tolerable or believable. One blessing is that Oren's life was lived in full, so I don't want to imply that his final moments had any more significance than those that came before. But the final messages we exchanged are a wonderful reflection of what it means to live life at full tilt. The last WhatsApp I received from him said, what else? I'll send an email.
I'd also like to invite Max Volkov.
Thank you. You don't know me, and I guess I'm the person who knew Oren the least. My name is Max. I'm Ukrainian, and I met Oren as his interpreter on his trip to the Crimea, which was occupied by the Russians at the time, and as it was mentioned several times. And I've counted how many times I've met Oren in total, and it was just 6 times. And the first time was in 2014, but somehow we became close friends. And I don't know how it works. I don't realize how it works, but it's just, incredible. And so we went to the Crimea, and I was a total stranger, he was a total stranger. But all the way there and all the way back, all that I've heard of him was about his family. I mean, how many times you meet a stranger who would tell you everything about his family? By the end of the trip, I thought I knew them personally. And he would talk and talk and talk about them, and then at some point in time, we got to a roadblock, and there are all of those military people, all armed, all Russians, as we all know. And at the time, Oren is talking to Jeannie, and we approach that, and those people are coming over with guns, you know, and they tell us, like, get the hell out of the car. And he's like, oh, Jeannie, I'll call you back a little later. and as we learned later, Jeannie was like, you know, what am I supposed to think about that? So we went in, we talked to people, and at some point in time, we came to a military unit that was surrounded by Russian forces, and something happened there, and they all gathered into like a big group of people. Someone inside, they're shouting, and you feel the tension, and Oren probably knew just one word in Russian at the time, and he, of course, wanted to be in there, right in there. He walks up to those people, and he gets out his phone and starts shooting a video. And I hear somebody saying, like, take all of the cameras, all of the phones away immediately. So I whispered to him because, you know, being an English speaker at the time was not a very good idea to be around those people. And so I whispered him, like, get your phone away. And he's like, okay. So he puts it in the pocket. And I'm okay. I told him to, don't talk. Just, you want to watch? You will see everything. Just don't talk. He said, okay. I turn away, and in like 10 seconds, I see Oren, the only person shooting the video, you know. No one else was doing that, but he was in there. So that was a hell of a trip, and I mean, every day that we walked and talked to people, he was not afraid. People were afraid. They were shattered. They were basically paranoid and intimidated. He was not. He was talking to people openly. He would always approach them in the most sincere way he could. And I should tell, well, his colleagues, they probably know about that, but I just want to highlight again how unbiased and how much integrity was in his work. I was obviously the person with an interest. You know, I'm Ukrainian, so I would ask, so Oren, which side would you pick? I mean, what is your opinion? Never he said anything different, but I'm not here to have an opinion. I'm here to reflect the true story, the way it is, just the way it is. And whenever he published something and sent back to Washington, before doing that, he would give his text to me and he would say, is it the way it was? And I would read through and say, yeah, this is exactly what I've heard. He said, okay, post. And then he would send it over. And the story about the cat that was mentioned today, that was another trip of Oren to Ukraine, but that was already to the east of Ukraine, where the war is still raging for 4 years now. He just met that old woman who was sitting there and crying with a cat on her lap. And he just came up to her and said, why are you crying? What happened? And she said, well, they just bombed my house. I have no place to live. I have nowhere to go. And so he just wrote that story, and he inspired many, many people all over the country to donate money. And as it was said, yes, he actually followed it through up to the moment when that woman got her own house and her cat is living with her there, and they're happy. And they're actually having, you know, that is a tradition in the Slavic people. They keep icons of the saints somewhere in the corner of their room, and they would put a candle there. So Oren's picture is probably right there, standing next to those icons. And I wouldn't be surprised, because that woman, she was basically praying to him as he was a saint when he returned back, and she was already in that house. And, you know, so he was always talking about his family, and I've already said that, and he was kind enough to invite me and my wife and my daughter to Passover. And, you know, it doesn't happen that often. I don't have many friends, and especially in the United States. He was one of the 2 friends I actually have in the United States. And the person, I told my wife, so Oren is inviting us to the Passover. She's like, well, I saw him once. I'm like, yes, that's Oren, you know. And so we drove there to Janie's and Oren's place, and he spent those 2 days with us. We would sit late at night playing boarding games, right, with Malcolm and Leo, and he would talk and talk and talk. He told me all this story about Passover and all about the Jewish people. I know much better now, you know, much more than I knew before. I thought I knew a lot, but no. And I should say that, well, I never had a father of my own. And when I learned who Oren was and what kind of a person he was, I think I actually saw him as a father figure, you know, because that's the person you want to be around, and that's the person you get a lot of inspiration from. And I would call him, and we would talk hours and hours and hours on the phone. My wife would say, "Who's that? Who are you talking to?" And I'm like, "It's Oren." "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." Like, you know, so it's fine. So we would laugh, we would talk. And whatever idea I would have, I would say, okay, I think maybe I would do this, and maybe I would do that, because we're just a little less than 2 years in the United States, so I'm not that very confident yet. And he would say, do it. Just go and do it. And I would say, okay, but what if I wouldn't succeed? And he said, doesn't matter. Start failing, and finally you would get there. And that's Oren. That's the father figure. That's the person everyone should be proud of. And I'm proud of knowing him, and I'm proud of being friends with him. And for me, he will always be somewhere around. Thank you.
So we have time for just a couple more people to share a memory. If you'd like to share a memory of Oren, and you'd like to come up here, I invite you to do so. We only have 5-10 more minutes, so not everyone will be able to share. But if you look on your programs, you'll find a way to share your story with USA Today, who's collecting stories and memories about Oren. And whether or not you've had a chance to speak this evening, we really hope that you will bring your story there and share more memories there. There are so many, more than there's time to talk about, and more than you might have thought of tonight. So sleep on it for a few days, a few weeks, take the time, and then write them up. So people would like to come up to share. Can do so. We do have time for a couple people.
So for me, it's absolutely unbelievably amazing to see so many people here and to hear all these stories. I've known Oren since I was 13, and hear my story parallel with his cousins in Israel and how he thought of Oren as his brother, and Oren was very much my brother. But what's amazing is that there's some themes that I hear from everybody that are very similar, and I find it remarkable that one person could have done all of these things with so many people and become such a successful, important person. And I can tell my stories. I can tell how Oren and I used to go for very long walks when we were in Philadelphia, through the bad parts, the good parts. You always felt a lot braver when you were with Oren, because as you've heard, he had no fear. Just enough sense to avoid catastrophe. And through our lives, we were very close. We basically saw each other all the time, and when I moved back to Wisconsin, Oren would show up. And how did he get there? He was hopping trains. And when I became a curator at the New York Botanical Garden, he came to visit. And when he moved out to California, he crashed with cousin Malcolm. And what I see and what I hear is Oren treated everybody like family. And it was very true. He would show up and crash on your whatever, and he would open his door for you immediately. And that's the kind of hospitality that sadly doesn't really exist that much in our culture, and should. And maybe we can think how we can reflect that spirit for Oren, from Oren. One thing that I noticed nobody said, and I'd like to share, was when Oren was in high school, he was really all over the place. And so we mentioned these terms, creative, ADD, you know. He was prepping his mind for some very big thinking. He never got a paper in on time, and he would work for hours, days, on just a simple assignment. He never shortcut it. And his grades suffered, and it took him a long time to go to school, to get, decide to go to college. And he and I would reflect how both of us, in a way, were late bloomers because we shared these traits. And what was being generated was an incredible mind who could do this kind of reporting and touch people. Oren and I would text all the time, and it was usually about news. I'm obsessed, and I'll spend hours reading it, and he was my scoop, and I was always recommending stories for him to cover, and he rarely listened. He knew better than I, but it was really a gift, and so to his family, to his sisters and wife and sons who carry his wonderful spirit, we will be there, and you will be part of our lives, and welcome into my family anytime. And I just will finish by saying how beautiful it is for all of us to be together to share this wonderful person's memory. Now I'll say something else. I know we've been here listening, and that's another amazing tribute. My wife, who is Israeli, and is incredibly impulsive and creative and productive and incredibly pushy. I mean, incredibly pushy. And I wish she could be here, but she, of course, is doing a night shift. And I see some similarities, and that's very nice. And she met Oren a little while back, maybe a couple years ago. You know, Oren and I, we were in touch. We kind of get out of touch, came back in touch. But when she heard the news, she immediately emoted. And she kept saying, I really like him. I really, really liked him. And that kind of likability is incredible. And she didn't hesitate. And Ginny said the same thing. You know, she said, oh, well, we have to start a GoFundMe for Oren. And Ginny said, well, she reminds me of Oren. This kind of not thinking twice to do the right thing. And just enough to protect you from what could happen. And so I leave here today inspired.
Ose Shalom is a traditional prayer whose words are actually the final stanza of the Mourner's Kaddish. And it's a prayer that asks the divine to create peace. So I'm imagining this as a call for the divine to create peace within us, and then maybe eventually a call for the divine within us to help make peace within one another in this room today. We've heard from so many people this evening who are incredibly talented speakers, thinkers, artists, and also talented at loving. And we're going to really need that skill as we move forward. So let's sing together. Oseh Shalom, it's a prayer for peace. Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imhu amen. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Zichrono livracha. His memory will be a blessing.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Justin Thwaites, and I work at Voice of America, and I had the opportunity to meet Oren maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And, you know, from the first time I met him, and sometimes you have people where they'll come into the studio and they'll just walk by and they'll go straight in. But Oren, I mean, as soon as he came in, the first time I met him, he came right up to me, introduced himself. And you can tell, you know, God puts people in your life sometimes, and you just know they're special from the first time you meet them. And Oren was definitely just one of those type of people. And I actually saw him the morning of June 8th. We recorded for the show. And I was just, I mean, every time he came to the studio, I was just excited to see him, to talk to him. And it would just be very brief. We would talk a little, you know, a couple minutes before the show and after the show. But he was just a joy to be around. So, you know, all the stories that I'm hearing about Oren, it just makes me feel really good that I at least had some time with him, you know. So, you know, those memories are just wonderful of Oren. And when I found out the news, of course, like everyone else, I mean, I was devastated because, I mean, I saw him earlier that morning. And instantly, I thought about, you know, his family, his boys. You know, I have 2 sons. And it was the weirdest thing happened to me, even after we had recorded. I didn't find out until the next week, but I was just thinking about Oren the whole week. And I never do that. And something just told me to come to his service. I made sure to find out, to be here so I could, you know, speak to his boys and just let them know, you know, it gets better. You know, my father passed away when I was very young. It's been almost 30 years. And you never know how life is going to go. It's such a scary thing when your father passes away very suddenly. And I'm just thankful that, you know, I have his DNA in me and grew to be a great man. And y'all have, you know, writings from your father and everything. And you could just tell he was a joy in life. You know, the last time I saw him, he was just so excited about riding his bike. I saw him with his helmet. And I'm like, what you doing with that, Oren? He's like, yeah, I got this bike, and, you know, I'm trying these bikes out. And I was just so happy for him. I mean, he was just a joy to be around. And the last time that I was here in this church, in this sanctuary, was for the memorial service for one of DC's just wonderful women, Loretta Carter Haynes. And she's another person that when I met, just from the first time, I just fell in love with her and just her spirit. Some people just have a spirit, they just draw you in. And I'm telling you, God puts you and people in your path for a reason. And Oren is just one of those people. But one thing that one of the speakers said earlier, it just reminded me of something that I called her Mama Loretta. Something that she said, and it's just an excerpt from a Washington Post article they had about her. And it said, when I was 5, a man we called Brother Jordan, who was 105, would stop by our house and bring my brothers, sisters, and me sweet potatoes for treats. We'd sit at his feet and listen to his stories. He'd always end by saying, children, you've got to bring others across the bridge of life. And I'd say, yes, sir, although I didn't know at the time that was my calling, to be of service to others. And I feel like Oren, as well as, you know, Mama Loretta, was just service to others. And I just wanted to come and speak to the boys and just let them know it'll get better. You guys are gonna be great men, just like your father. I mean, I'm telling you, I did not have that much time with him, but I just had to come here just to let you guys know. And even though you lost your father in his physical form, you got a brother. So if you can, you know, look me up, come to VOA, whatever you want to do, you got a brother now. And if you ever need to talk, you know, just be that ear for these boys, because one of the hardest things is, especially when a parent dies when you're so young, is being able to express yourself and talk to people and people actually listen. You know, children are very smart. They can pick up on when someone's really not listening to them. So just be that ear for them, you know, when they want to speak, just listen, you know, because just being able to express yourself to someone is, I mean, it's nothing like that. And I just want to end by saying, I spoke to my grandmother and I was telling her that I was coming here, and she's 93. And she told me to tell the boys, she told me to tell you guys, you know, God will never leave you and he will never forsake you. And I just want to say your father had a lot of love, and you got a lot of people out here that are just going to show you that love and just keep going and just, you know, death happens, but we got to move forward and just love each other. That's all we can do. So, you know, when you're with your family and your friends, you know, don't go to sleep angry at each other. You know, say I love you, hug it out, whatever you need to do, because you just never know the last time you'll see someone. So I just wanted to say those words. Thank you.